Check, check.
Prayer and salute and all that, and you're up the top? Sure. Okay, if you would please stand. Mr. Harrison, you can pray for us, sir.
Father, we just thank you for this time of meeting. All the decisions we make today will be best of you. Lord, we pray for the young man, lost his life in the bill. Pray for his family. We pray for Midge and Patrick O'Banner that helped raise him. And he was, everyone in town knew him, and he was a great loss to our community. And Father, we just pray a blessing upon them all. Father, we pray for our military. We pray to keep them from harm's way. We just love you and praise your name. That's all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
This is a budget workshop of the Henry County Board of County Commissioners being held on Tuesday, June 16, 2020 at 3:30 p.m. at the John Boy Auditorium in Clewiston, Florida. In attendance are Chairman Mitchell Wills, Vice Chair Emma Byrd, Commissioner Darrell Harris, Commissioner Michael Swindle, Commissioner Carson Turner, County Administrator Jennifer Davis, County Attorney Mark Lapp, Ad Interim Clerk Kimberly Barno.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, everyone. Before you have a PowerPoint presentation printed out, everyone here should have one. If you go to the second page, it's just a heading. The third page is just listing out all the districts. And then the following page is a budget snapshot. We'll start there. Today's budget workshop is the first of our 2021 budget workshop process. It's a general overview. There's a lot of information that we do not have available at this time. At the end of this workshop, I'll ask your desire for a workshop in July, which I recommend because I believe we'll have a lot more information, more detailed information to be able to make better decisions, and also before you have to make a decision on trim in the July meeting for the millage rate. So with the budget snapshot, our total budget for the entire county, it includes all funds under the Board of County Commissioners, is $71.4 million. The general fund by itself is right at $30.4 million. Our current millage rate is 7.9312. It generates a little over $17 million. You'll remember this year that we're in right now, this was our rollback rate, so we did not have a tax increase in the current year that we're in. Our June estimate from the property appraiser is $2,377 million. It's up quite a bit from prior year. It's an 8.33% increase. Of that amount, new construction is estimated to be about $56 million of the increase, or these are not final numbers, these are estimated because we don't have our July final number yet. But if I estimate a rollback rate, it would generate about $423,000 more than our current year at rollback rate, which is a great thing. The way that calculation is done is it allows you to capture new construction without recognizing a tax increase. July 1st figures will be updated and available for our next workshop that we hope to have in July. At any time, if you have any questions, just stop me.
I got one, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
What does the penny estimate?
We've got a whole slide.
Oh, you got a slide?
Yes,
for
sir.
that?
If you want to go there now, or we can just wait till we get there.
Yeah, we can wait. till we
Okay.
get there.
Sounds good. The next page is general fund only, and it's just a snapshot of the current year budget of all of our constitutional officers as well as our board line items and what percentage of the total general fund. This is not of ad valorem, and this is not as of total budget. This is of the total general fund and what that represents. And the following page is the actual pie chart that is associated with the same graph. So it shows that for about 42% of our general fund is for board line items, reserves, and then each constitutional officer. The next slide talks about revenue and where we are, a little bit of where we are today. Our state revenue estimates have not been made available for next year, so by the next workshop, we should have those estimates. However, the population number has come out, and it's about a 1.6% increase from where we are now. And we know that that is important because a lot of our state revenue sharing calculations are based upon population numbers. In the current year that we're in, with everything that has gone on with COVID, we would love to be able to tell you more, but we're just going to go over what we know. Ad valorem collections to date are at 92.7%, and I think, we still have quite a bit of ways to go between now and September 30th. And so I think that's a good number for where we are today, given our economic conditions. We'll continue to keep you updated on that number. Our state revenue numbers fall usually several months behind from where you are. So for example, it looks like we just received some of April figures. And so we went through and kind of compared them to last year, and they're down ever so slightly. Our April figures, I'm more concerned about May figures. And May numbers have not come in yet. So I would expect in the next few weeks or by the end of this month, we'll have May numbers. So by the time we come back in July, we'll know where we are. And that's going to be able to define what specific shortfall we may have from a state revenue perspective.
Yes, sir. You were saying April was down just slightly?
Yes, yes.
You saw what the state share was. I mean, it was down some astronomically high figure, scared the bejesus out of everybody.
And a lot of and one of the good, is bad, but it's good, we're considered a fiscally constrained county. So those figures is the majority of our state revenue in the general fund, and that is a number. That is a appropriation allocation, if you will, that's done from the state perspective. And so my discernment, just looking at that, and I'll go through and confirm what I'm getting ready to say, is that number is going to be sound, whereas our half-cent sales tax and our 1 cent sales tax and state revenue sharing specifically, those numbers, I foresee those numbers to fluctuate.
You do know that our fiscally constrained dollars have been threatened before to be cut off.
Yes.
So you just be cognizant of that. That was something that we've had to lobby on before in Tallahassee. They've always worked with us. Because in the grand scheme of a multi-billion-dollar budget, I think for the total state, it's like $630 million for the 36 counties that are fiscally constrained. But, we're probably going to be made whole. That's a good point. But
Right.
This year's budget estimates, obviously, it's scaring everybody right now.
Yeah, the state's hurting too.
Yeah, that's what I'm mostly referencing.
And then May should be worse than April.
Yeah, I expect May to be the number that we really need to focus on and see where we're at. Some better news, however, the building permit revenue is collected to date at 78.4% or up 7% to date. Now, we know that fluctuates. We know we don't bring in the same amount of money every month and so on, but that number is up from our projected amount for the year.
What does that mean, collected at 78.4%?
It
would only be collected if permits were being applied for, correct?
Yes, yes. So it's whatever our estimate was. We've received 78.4% of our total estimated for the year to date. I'll get you the exact figure.
So the estimate is just that. So if we had X number of people come in that wanted to apply for a permit because building was actually moving forward at a more positive rate, our estimate would be irrelevant and our figure would probably be higher. But if we would have had lower people apply for permits, the estimate
Yes.
would have been irrelevant and we would have had just a lower figure.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And our planning revenue collected to date is at 96%. And, we're in June and our end of our year is September. So, just from looking at these numbers, it looks like we're going to come in over budget from a revenue perspective. And so it speaks to a trend throughout all of this COVID that we've had, and Margaret can speak to it in a little bit more detail if necessary. We have not stopped in our building department and planning department, and if anything, we've probably been busier. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So I was just trying to show you big picture, kind of what's going on in that department. The next slide talks about the CARE Act a little bit. Tonight, in your board packet, under consent, we're going to pull a letter that we prepared for you all to approve, because when we got the books done, we did not have this information. This information just came about Friday, and there's still information that we are still gathering, and we will report at a later date. But I don't think it's necessary to do that letter. It's kind of outdated at this point since the governor released some of the money. Tonight before you, I do have an add-on for you to approve the agreement sent by DEM for the CARES money. It just came in over the weekend. What it looks like right now is that $1.8 million is 25% of the distribution for Hendry County. An estimated $7.3 million is allocated for Hendry County. We must establish a plan for distribution. We have met on an internal staff perspective over a phone call yesterday, discussing on what that might look like internally to begin with. Tomorrow, there is a Florida Association of Counties webinar regarding this subject that I will be attending, as well as some other staff members, so we can learn more about this. The monies for Hendry County are not just for the Board of County Commissioners. It is for all of Hendry County. So it's the school board, it's the cities, it's the health department, it's all public agencies. And so, but we, as the Board of County Commissioners, we are going to be responsible for the distribution. And so we've got to outlay a plan. We have to outlay procedures of when people request the money from us, and then we give them the dollars of the proper backup and the proper eligible criteria, et cetera, et cetera. So we are going to be working on that very soon. And the big thing is you can't, what the documents, the Treasury documents show, you cannot offset revenue shortfalls. So we just talked about our state numbers. We don't really know where we're at, but we know we're going to be down. And then we get this CARES money. That's great, but then you can't offset it. So I talked to someone at DEM, and we hope to know more tomorrow after our webinar. And they said you can get, though, really creative regarding COVID. So while we can't say, okay, well, our state revenue figures for 1 cent and our half cent is down $500,000 or whatever it might be, a couple $100,000, we can't take this money and just fill that hole, but there might be other ways within our budget that we can pull these monies down legitimately, and it might be something we had budgeted, and we can take those dollars and fill that hole. So we have to get creative. You know, I feel like tomorrow during the webinar, they're going to talk to us in detail about some of those creative ideas. With DEM, some of the things that they talked about in our conversation was, just as an example, doesn't mean we have to do it, but these are just examples, like with the schools. We know schools have to get ready to be opened up, and so anything that they may need to do to provide the facilities and the teachers and the staff and the students to be safe when they do so, that would potentially be eligible. Something with the health department, if they wanted to hire potentially more epidemiologists for do contact tracing, for example, they said that would be eligible. So one thing that we are working on now is this is not to take the place of what we would get reimbursed for from FEMA. So as you know, anytime we have a disaster, a hurricane, it's always been hurricanes in the past, we apply to FEMA to get reimbursed for our costs, and it's usually a 75-25, and depending on the threshold, we might get some of the match waived. So we can't double dip. We cannot double dip, but we'll still be requesting those dollars through FEMA to get reimbursed for our hard cost. And then these dollars are going to be different. And then once we identify where we're at, what we can use, the cities and our other public agencies within Hendry County, where we are in the whole grand scheme of things with the 7 million, then we can provide some kind of public assistance to potential businesses and/or residents and some type of grant program. And so we will decide what that looks like, lay out the criteria within the scope of the rules and regulations from the Treasury, and we will be moving forward with that.
Who
So
makes that decision?
you'll make the decision on what that plan represents.
Okay.
And that will outline the policy of how we proceed.
With other stakeholders involved.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is your, I mean, I don't know if y'all want to have that discussion right now. It's
Yes.
3:56, but Mr. Chair, what are y'all's thoughts on a giant roundtable in a room such as this to say, hey, you know, Henry County School Systems, what do you need? LaBelle needs X, Y, and Z. Who leads that? Is that you? Is it him? I don't know. You know, Henry County Sheriff's Department needs X, Y, and Z. The City of Clueston's Police Department, how are we going to move forward with that? What are your thoughts?
So honestly, my thoughts were to wait till after that webinar tomorrow and see if they might outline some ways to do that in the most efficient manner, some best practices or guidelines or whatever their recommendation might be. But it absolutely, to your point, has to be in collaboration with all the different agencies.
So we're allowed to also provide not for other public agencies. And then what happens if, okay, the voluntary pre-kindergarten system of Hendry County, I think there's 14 providers countywide. They need assistance. They don't have two nickels to rub together, or, you know, mom and dad, or we already have a huge volume of students that go there that are they're basically going on school ready or work readiness dollars. So obviously there's a means issue there. Are we allowed to provide to that? I'd like that question to be asked. And then, you know, I don't know what other entities there are that we may need to look at, but I know Lee County, for example. Lee County had a situation where if you were in a business in Lee County, you could, I'm just going to give you a general idea. I don't know if y'all heard about it, but
Yeah.
I don't know the details specifically how they did it. But the gist was Sonny's Barbecue sent in an email or picked up the phone and called Lee County, and they said, we have 37 employees. We're 2 facilities. They said, okay, come to this warehouse. We'll have your box ready for you. It'll have, you know, mask, gloves, hand sand, so on and so forth, to meet a volume that you have. And that was provided via the county government in an effort, you know, to stop the spread of COVID. You know, thinking of Roland Martin's Marina, you know, I remember talking with Raymond early on in this about how many employees they had, housekeeping. Those are costs that all these businesses had to wear. Beefo, Brady's, Domino, I mean, you know, all that stuff. I don't know how that all plays out. And I just think those are little things that we should probably ask those questions.
Sure.
If that's something that can be a cost that's on the bear of the burden of the county, because the way I understand it, how the dollars are flowing on the CARES Act, you know, there's some very interesting things that other counties are doing. And obviously you all know about the 12 counties that got the lion's share of the money. But 7.3 or even 1.8 are huge numbers to Hendry County. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that can help offset some costs to these different companies and different entities that had to wear something. But I want to know if we can do that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I will send you all, if you want to go through this Treasury document, and it talks about criteria, basically, and then tomorrow on the call, I'm sure that we'll get in much more detailed discussions on some of the things that you're asking, and
And in what I read, I believe it's all eligible.
I
But I
think
just
it
want
is.
to, I just want to put it out there for y'all to think about, and if there's anything else, that we need to kind of vent on.
Lee County got a chunk of money.
Yeah, the 12 counties that got that money, that was a huge
Yeah.
amount.
All right, the next slide is Commissioner Harris's slide on the 1 cent sales tax. And so for 2020, the estimated, in the current year budget is $3.2 million. 59% of this amount is used for general operating purposes in the general fund.
Do we have the
And-
2019 numbers just right off the hip? Because obviously it wasn't 59% of 3.2, right?
No, I think it was a little over 3 million, just a little over 3 million.
Just a little, like 30 something, wasn't it?
I think so. The remaining amount is used for capital purchases and improvements on facilities
But
for
that,
Hendry County.
Number there, wasn't we going to decrease that every year?
We have been, ever so slightly, but we have been decreasing it every
So is the
year.
59 last year or a decrease?
I believe it was a little over 60,
Oh,
60,
So you've already decreased it?
just a little bit. Yes, sir.
Commissioner Harris, I can't remember, but I think we've decreased it 3 times.
Yeah, because remember.
actually,
It
I
used to
have
be
a
100%.
Yeah.
It used to be 100% to that. And Jennifer, that's something I'd love to see in the July budget, showing us where it was. And I want to say that we've decreased it 3 times over a 5-year span, but I could be dreaming.
Okay, so, well, that's not right. Okay, so for 2019, it was 64%. And 2020, it's 59%. So we went down 5% in the year that we're in.
That's good.
4 to 5 years ago,
It
it was
was-
100%.
Yes, it was
toward balancing the
100, and
budget.
we went to 80, and then so the last few years, we've brought it down.
I remember when we had $1.6 million,
Yeah.
and it just kept on.
So, with what we were just talking about with our estimates, if this 3.2 doesn't pan out and doesn't come in, then all this is going to, all this might look a little bit different. Now, we do have some reserves in our capital fund, which is where this money goes before it gets transferred, the portion that gets transferred to the general fund. So we may be okay from that perspective in the current year budget, but all that to say, I think we're going to know a whole lot more in July at our
So
workshop.
when do you know about the penny?
Well, in July, at least we'll know what our May numbers were, and I believe that's probably going to
Does that
be,
go all the way to October?
it will go through September.
Or Sept, yes,
Mm-hmm.
okay.
But I don't think we'll have a hard number. I mean, we'll show a forecast. but We won't know that until 30 days
Yeah.
out and hope
But you'll
that it's
know
that.
something anyway.
Yeah,
We'll have a better idea.
yep.
And so that was my next bullet. We'll know more next month.
Jennifer, I don't see, you gave us on building and permits and planning revenue. Do you have any idea what that 1 cent sales tax looks like right now? Is it at 60% or 70%?
Let me see. Actually, I ran the report for 2 years because I was comparing
Month to month?
month to month and doing the delta. So
And April's already in, or May's already in?
April's in, not May. April was down, for example, let me just give you some examples. On half-cent sales tax, April is down 32,000 from April last year.
What was the total number?
What do you mean?
Like, did it generate 100 grand, or did it generate?
Half-cent sales tax, I believe, just give me a second, I have this all open on the computer.
If you don't have it, it's just, those are
Yeah,
things I'd
it's
love
right
to
here.
see.
I got it right here.
I think it's a clear picture.
More that the pennies are coming in more
Yeah.
because they're opened out there.
State revenue sharing total for the year in the general fund for 2020 is $908,000.
Through month of April.
No, that's the budgeted figure for 2020. That's the total
I'm sorry,
anticipated,
state revenue sharing for the year is
$908,000.
908,000.
That's only half cent, though.
No, and
No,
then,
that's the state revenue share.
and then half cent is
state revenue share, I'm
1.6 million. Half cent is 1.6 million.
Okay,
And
got
then the fiscally constrained is right at 3 million. It's 2,997,000. That figure, I am hoping, I'm being optimistic, that that number is going to be more solid because it's more of an appropriation figure. The half cent and the state revenue sharing, which is a total of the 1.6 plus the 908, that is the figure I'm concerned about in the general fund, as well as the 1 cent in our capital fund that we transfer over.
Do we know if gas tax is way down?
Shane, do you have a percentage, or
We don't know yet. We know it's going to go down. We don't know how much.
I'm sure they're in the same boat
Well,
with their
don't they get-
distributions.
But you don't have a monthly estimate either?
No, sir, we're still waiting on the revenue
Yeah.
numbers to come
This
in.
is- And depending on which one it is, some is a little more up to date, and then other line items could be a little bit more behind. So I wish we knew more, but I think we will know for our July meeting. We'll have a better understanding of what that looks like. Okay. With that said, part of this $3.2 million in our capital fund, we have $150,000 of that money that we've budgeted for the credit line interest.
So,
Commissioner?
150,000
I have an extra.
interest, are we making a payment?
Yes, sir. And I don't think we'll use all of it.
Is
We're
it-
not going to use all of it, so that's going to give us could give us a little bit of cushion for some of these other revenue shortfalls, for example. But I just wanted to kind of bring
Is the
that.
payment in here?
It's already budgeted, yes,
Uh-huh.
sir. It's budgeted,
Okay.
Just the interest only, right?
yes. And then at the last meeting we had here at the John Boy, right before that meeting, I had sent you all an updated credit line where we were, and Ian and I talked this afternoon, and we're going to get that updated here pretty shortly again and get that sent out to you. We're waiting. The biggest issue and the biggest thing that we're doing right now with those projects is we're waiting to get the jail number, and that number we expect, and we've always expected it to be our largest project, and so we're patiently waiting for that to get formalized so we can see where we're at with some of these other projects. Now, what we've got started and what has already been started, we're continuing, but we're kind of backing off on some of the other things that aren't absolutely necessary until we know what that figure is.
So the line of credit has what on it right now?
So it's a $6 million total.
Yep,
And we've drawn down 1.55.
okay.
Yes,
So
sir.
that's your percentage to drive there, okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
The next page talks about the disaster relief fund. So we've been trying to see where we are with the FEMA. I think we're just about there. It looks like we've received most of our FEMA dollars from Irma, not quite all of them, but most of them. So once those transfers are made back to the disaster relief fund, we also, just to remind everyone that we have, and we haven't done it yet, we have another $150,000 that we budgeted from the general fund, I believe it was from the general fund, to disaster relief to help increase that balance.
Another 150K from general to go back into disaster relief,
Yes,
just because we're wanting to have the rainy day account,
yes.
literally.
Yes,
It's not a like rainy day account. But we had that budgeted for a current budget that we're in, but it's not
Yes.
been transferred yet.
that's correct. And I say that, not suggesting we don't do it, but just in light of our conversation, depending on where we are with some of our other figures, just to remind you all that that's there,
Okay.
if we needed to tap into that. And assuming we did make that transfer, then our disaster relief fund will have $4,657,000 in it at the end of
Okay.
fiscal year 2020.
All right, yeah, this,
If you made the transfer, it's 4.657?
Yes.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, this is, I got you, I understand.
Yep.
So in the total budget, you do have a contingent fund worked in?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
The
Yeah, I'm
next-
sorry, did I miss it, Jennifer? The last bullet there says you've received most of the FEMA monies. What's roughly what more do you
I think
expect?
we got, I believe, I'm going to say somewhere between 300,000 and 500,000 is still remaining to be received. And that does not include, however, the creek projects on the north side of the river, because we haven't spent those dollars. Those will be reimbursable, because that's another $2 million, a little over $2 million. So that'll be treated like any other project that we get, but I'm not,
Is that associated with Irma specifically?
yes.
And so we're 100% have the green light to do that project and get reimbursed. Maybe a couple years, but we'll get reimbursed.
For
Shane?
the cleaning of the creeks?
Yes.
No, we don't have the funding for it. We have funding from Irma for the,
For part of them.
I'm trying to think the correct word. It's for the mitigation of the Roy Brown and Austin Relief Canal, and we're going back and forth on that amount.
Right.
But the creek study, they had funding, then they did not provide us any funding because it was private property. We hired Johnson out of the North LaBelle in the Four Corners MSBU to do a creek study. That study has been reviewed. I've already sent my comments to Johnson. The report's basically finalized. And we're going to have to put out, we have to chase funding from the USDA and RCS, South Florida, or we have to fund the improvements ourselves.
That's
So-
100%.
So when I say creeks, they're all creeks, and so, but we had to separate them into different categories, if you will,
Yes.
because the Irma FEMA money would only pay for part of them, and then we are trying to chase money for
But
the
all the
others.
creeks that need cleaning is nowhere in sight.
I'm sorry,
All
I
the
couldn't understand.
creeks in North LaBelle, or wherever, they're still full of trees and everything. They was gonna give us all this $1 million, didn't give us nothing. And the two creeks he's talking about is in pretty good shape.
That's correct.
That's the reason they wanted to give him money, because they're in
They're
good shape.
in good shape.
Yeah, which is smart.
They wanted to give,
Who's
we
they?
were originally told,
State.
FEMA
State.
originally
FEMA
told us,
or
our
state?
liaison, that we would get funding for removal of debris from the creeks. Then they backpedaled and said they can't
Yes.
do that.
Yeah,
And then they were going to use USDA to fund it, but they said, you got to give us the location of all the obstructions, pictures, the amount, the quantity, within like 20 days. We didn't have that information, so we missed that deadline. We hired Johnson, the board approved it. We went out.
When did
and we-
USDA tell you that, Shane?
That was back like in October of last year. So we hired Johnson Engineering to go out and GPS, locate, photo, do a whole report of where all this was, so that if they provided funding, we had, or any grant provided,
Yep.
any grant funding source provided, we had the documentation to show where the obstructions were and describe them. If not, we could use the same information to put out our own invitation to bid regarding removal of the obstructions.
Okay, so as of today, right now, Hendry County has documentation and the ability to show on paper where all of the problems in
Yes.
all of the creeks, not just two, all of the creeks.
All the creeks in North LaBelle.
So what my man is talking about, what Commissioner Harris has been saying, we have to deal with holistically, we have that documented, so we could technically, if a grant were to appear, we could technically go after that now.
Yes.
What we couldn't do with the 20-day window last time.
Yes, what we couldn't do, we do have that information now to be
Okay.
able to do it, or we could self-fund it ourselves through an MSBU.
Do you have it?
Self-funding's gonna be a couple $1 million though, right?
I don't know the cost, we haven't put it out, but it could be. I'd say we'd be best to break off one creek at a time, put it out to bid, see what we get. Maybe put bid alternatives in.
Do you have that 100%, Shane?
Yes, we have a 100% report. We have that,
0% funding, though.
0%
Right.
funding. The oth-
Shane, is it mainly like trees that blew over during the Irma or laying in the creek? Is that what it is?
Trees, old boat docks, vegetation.
Everything.
Do you have right-of-ways?
No, we have to get right of entries from all the landowners.
Okay, so
'cause
you can't, so if it was a said Thursday and Friday, you can't tell your crew, hey, let's just take 2 days, let's go grab this section right here. You
No.
can't even get in there to do it.
Exactly. The only that was the problem with the FEMA funding. The only portion we control is what's in the road right away,
Okay.
and that's it.
Okay, so to your point, Commissioner Swindle, so even if we did have funding sitting in a shoebox somewhere, we wanted to go do it, or a grant came open, we probably would DQ ourselves because we don't have all of the easements and stuff. And are you talking about a few hundred easements and accesses
Usually
right
it'd be
away?
like, it wouldn't be an easement as much as just be a right of entry.
Yep.
The landowner signing it, and we would clean wherever they signed.
Have you attempted that and they're saying no?
No, well, we have attempted that in the past before, and one of the individuals that were complaining declined to give us an easement. That time we were looking for an easement, but for right of entry, we haven't went after those yet. We've done it in the past, and we've had no problems.
All right,
But that
here's
did-
what I'm asking, Commissioner Harris, if you would be receptive to this. Mr. Chair, I'd like to have, a 10, 15-minute report given to us in a board meeting so that we can all be up to speed on this, to know what easements or right of entries we do have in our possession right now, so that if magic money appeared, we could go after it. And then just a general overview of that report
Okay.
with aerial showing us what we're talking about here.
Then
If
it
y'all would be
gets,
agreeable with that, because I'm not familiar with it.
yeah, okay, I know where that, but it would be eventually subbed out if you ever got the money.
Yep.
Another thing to keep in mind with your right of entries, most of you got to understand, some of those right of entries you have, they give you right to go in the bottom of the ditch, and that's about it. So we got to make sure, if we're talking about a right of entry, we got to have room for either a backhoe or a great all to go down beside that, or you're going to have to walk something down that ditch, and that's what most of our, on that side of the county, a lot of the problem is there is no right of way, there's nothing
You
there.
gotta go right.
So we'd have to basically walk down some of these with a backhoe, so you got to keep that in mind. It's not as simple as saying, I'm just going to go in there and clear it.
All the ones that need to be cleaned, to be clear, we don't have right-of-way on, and the reason we don't get right of entries this far in advance is because it could change ownership, and they're only good for a limited time. They won't give you for a long
it's
time.
Timestamp. And then let me ask you one other question, and I'll be done with this on this issue. Are most of them, or none of them, or what's the percentage of navigable waterways so that you can access it via a barge and a loan stem or anything like that?
None.
I mean, there's a portion of Jack's Branch you can
Maybe
go
a
down, a portion of Pollywog, but
With John boat, maybe.
a lot of them, it's going to be just walking down, chainsawing,
Yeah, you'd have
snatch and drag out of there.
So not much different than the ditches in Flagpole, how they were.
A little bit, I mean, no, a little bit,
They're deeper and
a little bit bigger. I mean, we
They're
won't be
big old,
doing
they're
a,
big old creeks.
yeah.
we
big
wouldn't
ones.
be doing a full wax of all the vegetation. It's just to get whatever snagged in the creek. We don't want to destroy the banks to cause any erosion. It's just to get down trees or
I'm
anything
dying to see
blocking
this,
water.
because, I don't, we put barges in really shallow water a lot of times.
There's no water. Yeah.
Sir?
There's no water. It's not that big.
No.
It's small. I mean,
Small.
it's like a big Canefield Canal road, big Canefield Canal.
You can put a barge down all day long. I mean, a sectional is 12 feet wide.
I don't think there's any water in it, except unless there's hurricanes, there's not enough water to float a John boat.
And that's
Whisper
Hey,
Creek
hey.
has low and high spots.
Commissioner Harris gives a mean tour if you want to go look at it.
All right,
He'll go show you.
okay.
And the other, just for the board's information, the other money that FEMA provided, that was for mitigation of the side slopes of the Roy Brown and the Austin Relief Canal, because those sides blew out, and
But they've already provided that, and we've already done that work.
we already did the work before they provided the money. They want to do mitigation measures, and we're asking for more money than what's required because the mitigation measures they're requesting is not going to stop, in my opinion, is not going to prevent it from happening again. We're going to still have flooding that's going to cause adverse impacts, so we're kind of going round and round on that.
Those two's in good shape.
Well, I think, Mr. Chair, I think this is a prime example of where we need to know, and I'd like to engage the process with the United States Department of Ag and/or state DEP. And I know it probably doesn't have a lot of water quality aspects to it, but I bet there's some in there. And so, quality, quantity, timing, and distribution, they want to be able to handle all those things from a state level. So let's see if we can't get creative, Shane.
Okay.
Be interesting. And then, the 4.6 number, I don't care if it's 4 million right now. I mean, it's got to be close to that if you're saying 150 would take us to 4.6. And then if we're almost looking at 300 to 500K, a couple other questions I had. We did a tremendous amount of work, did we not, for debris pickup for other entities? Did we get reimbursed?
So.
How did that play out? You remember you know what I'm talking about? How did that
You're
go?
talking about cities,
Yeah, and Montura and I think Port LaBelle Utilities.
PLCDD also, yeah.
Porterville.
So I hope I don't say this wrong. So we got the match waived. So the match was waived, and so therefore they didn't have to invoice them. Is that right, correct, Shane?
Correct.
Yeah. So if the match wouldn't have been waived, we would have invoiced them for our share, in other words. So FEMA would have paid 75, there still would have been 25% to be paid. But because the match was waived, there was nothing to be paid.
Got you.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's really good. So, okay.
We-
Okay.
So,
That's
and we
great.
were uncertain for quite some time if that was going to happen, but we finally got the notification, documentation that occurred.
Let me ask y'all this. Well, I hope we don't have to have this discussion, but in the event that occurs again, are we wanting to foot the bill? I mean, I don't know what that number
Oh, I thought
was,
we decided no already.
I
I
thought
thought we've
we
already
did
had
as
that
well.
robust conversation.
But I just,
Didn't we talk about that?
I honestly remember
I thought we did.
a conversation.
I believe we decided that the municipalities needed to do their own, if they needed contractors, they needed to get their own, and they needed to do their own hauling, and that we were not going to do that again.
And so remember that, Commissioner Swindle? And then I'd also challenge you to say Central County plus, all of those different entities that are out there, if it's a 298 or whatever, I just think that we need to be kind of steadfast on where we are on that.
Chairman,
Shane, yeah.
Commissioners, we followed the board's last direction, which was the cities need to be on their own. So the county put out a,
We
request
did it
for
in
qualification.
sections, didn't we?
We did it in sections. We did it we did Henry County as just our own, that was included Montura and the Port LaBelle CDD. And then the city, we ranked for the city, and then the city got their board to approve it, and they're supposed to enter, each city's supposed to enter into their own contract. So we did a ranking for the city of LaBelle, ranking for the city of Clewiston, ranking for Henry County.
Yep.
And they participated in the selection process.
And so what year was that done? And
last
are those
summer.
agreements still standing?
And we
They
just did
still
that within the
stand.
last 12 months.
18 months?
It was 18?
28.
Yeah, I guarantee it was less than the last 12 months.
Golly.
Yeah.
So all agreements should, I'm assuming the city entered to their own agreements already, but I know
So,
the county
so
has.
can we just make sure our i's are dotted and our t's are crossed, because it's June 1, we're already into the letter D, and the last time that occurred, Dorian was in September, so.
Our contracts were, there was a three one-year contract. It was a one-year contract with 2 one-year renewals with the vendors. And so we've done year 1, and we renewed for year 2, and that goes till October. It's an odd date. We ended up with an odd, actually, we adjusted it. It's October 31st. It is the expiration of our contracts with the vendors. And I don't know what the cities have done. And we have one more year that we can extend mutually.
Well, then I would like to add to that, though, the reality is that when and if a disaster occurs, and it's going to be when, as it relates to a natural disaster, if either of the cities don't have their stuff up, we're going to end up helping them out. So I'd like to just be a little bit proactive and ask that question to them.
Okay. The next slide shows historical millage rates. So what we did is we have the 6 years, including this next year going into 2021. The estimated, and again, this is estimated, it will not be this rate. Based on the June 1st figure, the rollback rate would be 7.4992. And so I'm just showing what that looks like over the last few years, depending on where we end up at. The following slide speaks a little bit to MSBU rates. So tonight at your board meeting, you must adopt the not to exceed MSBU rates for trim. We're not doing millage, that'll be July meeting, but the MSBU rates have to be done at this June meeting. And so all rates are recommended to stay the same for trim purposes, with the exception of the recreational additions referenced in the staff report from Shane and East Fire MSBU. East Fire MSBU is not funded accurately at this time to be able to support the future needs of equipment that is anticipated, that is going to be needed, as well as some old debt that's been on the books for some time. And so about 3 years ago, we increased East Fire MSBU. If you all will remember, West Fire has stayed the same. And so we did that because the expenses were exceeding the revenues. And so we increased, we had to. And so while in the last 3 years, when I did a quick analysis, the revenues have increased expenses, but literally 5,000, 11,000, not very much. And so when you're looking at having to pay back some of the old equipment debt that has been owed forever, and there's never been enough additional revenue to pay that back, and that's either owed to our general fund or to our capital fund. I can't remember which one, or maybe a little of both. We need to look at, so you have to do one of two things. You have to either increase revenue or you have to decrease expenses. I mean, there's no other way to do it. This is our only, and it's a good thing to say, but we need to deal with this one way or the other. It's our only MSBU that has any kind of fund balance issue. It's legitimate debt that came before the board years ago for equipment and so forth. It's fine as far as that goes. But I think we've been maybe a little overly optimistic that the increase 3 years ago would cover it, and it has not. In addition to that, the city manager from Clewiston and I have been working very closely on this issue. You'll remember sometime back at a LaBelle meeting, some of the firefighters came before you, and we're also requesting some additional benefits and so forth. We've had multiple conversations as of late regarding some of those requests. I do not, to be realistic, we're not going to be able to entertain all of their requests, but I do think there could be some low-hanging fruit that we might be able to consider. My position on looking at that, though, has been if we do it, we have to do it countywide, meaning we have 3 unincorporated fire departments, and we also have another city fire department that we fund via agreement. So it's
I think we fund 70 cents on the dollar, roughly.
67%.
67%
Yes.
of every dollar spent for the City of Clewiston Fire Department.
Yes.
Okay.
And so we have an outdated agreement, as we all know. And so we are working through updating it for the city of Clewiston to be more consistent with the city of LaBelle. If we update something that's outside of that agreement, we'll be updating both agreements so they will be consistent and the same. We're working through our 5-year average that is the premise of how we fund West Fire on a 5-year average, rolling average. And so we're working through the details of some of those numbers with Clewiston's. We've had some special circumstances over the last few years with the Trauma Hawk and so forth, and so we're talking about how we allocate those calls and making sure that that's being done fair and equitable, because that will set a premise of, for 5 years, potentially, on that average number. So it's important that we all agree to how those are being counted. So with that said, a new agreement, making sure that we're agreeable on those numbers, looking at some potential additional benefits for our volunteer firemen. They are volunteer, so they get paid per call. So they are not able to receive health insurance, for example. I mean, it's that was one of their requests. Well, that's not something that our health insurance provider, or probably any health insurance provider, would supply. So I don't think that's something that we're going to be able to do. The Florida statutes increased a accidental death and dismemberment benefit amount over the last couple years. I think it's been in the last 2 years that occurred, and it's up to $75,000, $150,000, or $225,000, depending on how the incident occurred. So that's an increase that they've realized in the last few years. We were looking, another request was a cancer policy and also a disability or accident policy. And so while I don't know that we can do all of those things, I think we can maybe work on a few of those things within a reasonable amount of money, not a huge amount of money. In addition, they have an aging fleet. The city manager is here tonight, and he can speak to that in more detail if need be. But they've expressed to me in the next few years, they're going to need some additional fire trucks and things like that. And so what we looked at is what would about $100,000 look like additional in the MSBU? What would that look like? Now, we would only pay whatever our percentage turns out to be with this new agreement, just to keep in mind. Whatever that number is, the city of Clewiston also will be paying a proportionate share of whatever is decided. And so, in doing so, approximately a 15% increase would equal about $96,000 or $100,000. If you look on the next page.
Hey, before we go any further.
Yes, sir.
And I did glance at the next page, but I just want to, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, sorry. So, number one, I absolutely love BU. So I love that the fact, that we're discussing this, and this is a great model for other discussions in taxing systems for the future, I hope. This is one of the areas where we're asking men and women to bail off into the most dangerous situations a human can get into. To not have them train properly, equip properly, get there and get home safely is just absolutely ludicrous to us. To me, anyway. And I hear what you're saying, but I just want to be sure that you're comfortable with the 15%, because 3 years ago we thought we had it, and that wasn't it. Now here we are again. So if we've got to raise it, let's make it adequate and get over the sting of it and move on, so that they can move forward with the tools they need and the training they need and the equipment they need to be safe every time the phone rings or they have to go. Does that make sense?
It does.
So if it needs to be 20% or whatever it needs to be,
So-
I think this is something that everyone, can understand. And I get that some of the larger items that deals with the human aspect we're going to have to deal with countywide, and I appreciate that. But we're dealing with a specific department and their needs. Is that correct?
It is. It's City of Clewiston and also our Montura Fire Department. So we have two fire departments under the East Fire MSBU.
Right.
Pioneer.
No, Pioneer
Is west.
is west. Yes,
That's
sir.
the dividing line. I thought we didn't move them with the recreation.
That
Just
was
recreation.
only, yeah.
Just recreation. Good enough.
And just because you brought that up, and I don't have these figures ingrained in my brain right this second, but when we moved the recreational line for recreation, I looked at moving the fire line as well to see what that might look like, and it actually created a worse situation for East Rec, because the Pioneer budget is X, and then the revenue was something less than X, that if you took in that same boundary line. So,
Jennifer, you mean it actually created a worse situation for East Fire?
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
East
okay, I just
Fire,
wanted to
I'm sorry, I
confirm. Yeah,
misspoke. Yes,
that's
sir.
okay.
Yeah,
So
but,
Jennifer, you do 15%? You're not going to come back next year and ask for 5?
Well, that's my point. If we need to do something more, let's do it all at one time.
Well,
That's my
hold
point.
on. I just want to say, I know in my business, my employees probably want a 10 or 15% increase anytime I ask, do we need more money? They'll say yes. And so for me, I just have to know exactly what the old debt is in reference to, and then what are the future needs? Are the future needs a new truck? Commissioner Swindle, you kind of allude to, it's very important that we send these people into the field of work and what they're doing and make sure they're safe. I would assume, once again, you don't like to assume things, but I would assume that that's already occurring. I don't see how we could actually,
Yeah, the equipment ages, the bunker gear ages, the tanks
Yeah.
age, they have to, that's
In
what
the
they're
last
saying, their
meeting-
equipment's getting old.
In the last meeting, they had quite a bit of equipment that was outdated.
so we need to know that. We need to know that, and then we need to understand what are these grants that we're applying to every year that are to buy equipment and all of that, and how is that actually being applied? What are we staging out? How many people are we talking about? Do we have a force of 20 and we need to have 45 or 50 and they need to have a set schedule? I hesitate to use the word archaic, but I don't know the method of how they do things now. And, everything can be tweaked and efficiencies can be created. But to hear a 15% increase, but just a paragraph that says we have old debt and we need future needs. And then I'd also like to add to you all, when is Everglades going to a closing? October, is it? When is Everglades going to closing?
It's delayed.
It's been delayed.
It has been delayed. Because, I specifically remember hearing that that's going to be a huge shot in the arm. That's going to, it's going to allow us to be able to meet some of these needs that we have, And Commissioner Stone, I don't know if you'd like to speak to that, but I know that many times that's something that you have said, we've got to be prepared for that. We've got to be prepared for that on a number of levels. And so, and let me add one other thing too. If we're spending 67 cents on every dollar that is spent in the city of Clueston's fire department, and I think our agreement goes back to 1976 or something like that, and I know that I very nicely have met with Jennifer a couple times wanting to know what's the update as it relates to that agreement. How does that work? And, for an agreement to be drug out for 18 months now, to me, that doesn't reek of, it's moving along very well, so those are my thoughts.
Do we have a percentage rate of out-of-city calls and in-city calls?
I mean, I need to know all of that. I need to know volume of structure fires. I need to know, how many times a year do we have everybody and their dog reporting to Pioneer almost burning down? What's the historical average on that? Those are the things that we need to know. I think, you look in this rate here, vacant acreage is 0.27, is 27 cents an acre. It generates $7,100 a year. But how many times did we actually respond to a brush fire that put people's homes in jeopardy? Maybe that's something that needs to be tweaked, whereas I don't know what improved commercial at $702 per square, or the giant animal in the whole thing at $87.75 per dwelling. I don't know what that looks like. That generates $340,000 a year roughly. And then a duplex, a triplex, an apartment, all of those, it's the same figure. How much have those gone up in existence, So I want to look at it all. I think this is another one of those things. Maybe I'm getting too excited about having workshops to be able to understand something, but in the state that we all work in, we're not allowed to talk privately, and so I need to know what y'all are thinking on this sort of stuff.
Well, I can tell you, I don't disagree that we need a granular look, but I think that is going to be encumbered by enormous amount of time for preparation and then workshop and the meeting, and this decision's got to be made in a pretty short order.
This here's tonight.
So this is a not to exceed rate, and a suggestion that was just made, our next, I don't want to skip to the next slide yet, but we're referencing our EMS MSBU discussion that we had sometime, and we're just reminding everyone that we're going to be hiring a consultant, as you all agreed to at a meeting, to move that forward for the 2022 year. And so as a potential interim measure, this is not to exceed tonight for you to approve. You can go down in September if you so choose not to actually levy the amount if you were to increase it tonight. And then maybe roll in, if you want to dive into the actual categories, I think is what I'm hearing Commissioner Turner speak about, the actual categories, and have them do an analysis of the benefit, because you have to have that done, the benefit associated with the rate that you're charging, that could be something that we could potentially look at restructuring, how we are levying the fire MSBU. It's just a,
And the consultant that you mentioned is going to be just for EMS.
originally, yes, EMS, but Mark had just, we were talking about it earlier today, and he just suggested that maybe that might be something that you would want to consider.
Well, I don't have a problem with that, but again, that's going to be a little bit more longer term than what this is supposed to address, an immediate issue that needs to be rectified.
So I don't think that a 15% or a 20% or even say 25%, it's not going to fix the problem overnight. And Randy, you can speak to this if you would like to, but they alluded to you had some needs that were coming up in a few years, right? And so we thought that if this potentially was done now, and that was a few years down the road, that this additional dollars would probably fund the old debt and then allow for some reserves to go forward. A big portion of this conversation is the agreement. And so our agreement, we've been operating outside of the agreement, but with board approval for many years. The agreement talks
20 plus.
to 50/50. We've been paying 67. It's a number at the time. It was a 5-year average many, many moons ago. And so we've got to get to the crux of that number and what that means, and then also overages.
Guys, we had 1 year, it wasn't even a year, for landing the helicopter, for landing the Trauma Hawk, it was $172,000. Now, if that's not monitoring a budget, I don't know what is a budget going awry. But I can't expect the county administrator to look at every dollar and nickel and dime that's in here. And also, y'all all have day jobs as well, But I just think that we need to do a little bit more of a deep dive before we start doing a 15% increase. And I'm sorry, Jennifer, for cutting you off, but we're operating with I'm being very modest when I say it's a 20-year-old agreement. It's way older than 20 years.
Yes.
And so, there's a lot of bigger things that have to occur on a macro level, but I think we need to look on the micro and we need to drill in on this.
When do you think, what's the holdup and why can't we get the agreement looked at?
That's out of my pay grade. That's a day-to-day.
So we're working on that now. Randy, I think you spoke to it with your board last night and expressed to his board that we were working through it, and we thought that before September, before your final budget hearing, that we would have it all wrapped up and brought back to you before you made your final millage decision.
Okay,
With a new agreement and all these things ironed out.
okay.
Mr. Chair, Jennifer, how old is the debt? How far back is the debt?
Many years ago, it's probably I'm just winging it, probably 15-plus years old. There was a fire truck to begin with that was purchased, and the board at the time agreed to do a loan from East Fire, from, I believe it was the general fund. And so that was there. And it was a couple $100,000.
Is that why the agreement have not been changed because of the debt?
No, ma'am, no.
I would
And
like to leave the thought with this, and I'll leave it alone. I hear you, and I'm excited to hear that hopefully in the next 60 or so days that we'll bring that agreement, into the new realm of the operations. And I'm anxious to see what the MSBU on the EMS looks like. And this conversation will extend past my tenure on this board, but I would encourage my fellow board members to seriously consider that as a model, and then to wrap in the sheriffs, hopefully. I just think as a board member and as a citizen, the sheriff's budget needs to also be looked at with that same type of microscope and see if that EMS model at that point could not be applied to the sheriff's budget as well. I think that would be a huge, huge operational advantage for the sheriff, the citizens, remove that money out of the millage, and I think that would be a huge benefit. So I know that that's futuristic, but I just want to encourage y'all to please keep that in mind.
Can I ask you a question? Come on up to me.
He's got a gun. You gonna tell him no?
Not letting tonight.
Oh.
Must be said.
Just to clarify, and I may have missed something, so I'm kind of asking, but basically, Commissioner, you're needing to know basically how many calls and what type of calls the fire departments are running to, is that correct?
I want to know every detail I can possibly know that is
Right.
associated with cost as it relates to the fire department and us bringing that
Okay.
service to the
All right,
constituents.
because if it's call volumes, what type of calls, we can provide that between us and the Colusa Police Department, since we dispatch that, that's all kept in CAD, so I just wanted to relay that.
That
So I
would be
didn't know what a
awesome.
consultant, what all they did, if it was money that, didn't have to be spent, if it's something that we could provide, because I know a number of firefighters will be kept in-house at the fire department, in other words, number of personnel that's responded, but I just wanted to provide that in case y'all needed that. So.
Thank you. And just to remind everyone, we had a fire workshop. It was in LaBelle, right before COVID.
It wasn't that long ago.
And so there's a PowerPoint,
Yeah.
and we came up with all the calls. We came up with a price per call for LaBelle, Clewiston, over the last, I believe, it was 5 years.
Yeah, I think it was.
And that, all that data was provided at that time. I will resend that to everyone, just to refresh everyone for.
I truly thought that was going to be a catalyst for the agreement to be locked and loaded. So
I'm sorry, what was that? I just couldn't hear, I'm sorry.
I thought that discussion was going to be a catalyst for the agreement to move
Yeah.
forward.
Right.
And then we would come back and I thought that the decision would be a little
Yeah,
bit
yeah,
more
yeah.
hard, we would see it, taking shape, not hard.
Judge,
taking-
I
how
understand.
close is east and west budget as far as dollars?
The difference between east and west is that the West Fire has a reserve balance of about $750,000, whereas obviously east does not. And I did speak with the city of LaBelle this past week and talked to them about their budget, and they did not have the desire to. Just give me a second here, I can.
They didn't have a
pull it
desire to
up.
raise their MSBU.
They did not.
That
$700,000.
$750K in the bank. What are y'all doing, LaBelle? How does LaBelle have West Rec is sitting on cash? Commissioner Harris, they're yelling at you to speak into the mic better. But anyway, I'm going to get off my soapbox. I haven't
Okay,
even gotten
here
on
it
it yet.
is. Here
But
it is.
that's impressive that the city of LaBelle Fire, and I don't know what the call volume is, but these are just things that we ought to look at.
It's a little bit of a different animal.
It's a lot of a different animal.
There's different number of dwellings, different
Yep.
number of businesses, different number of, square
Method
foot.
of pay?
Yes.
How it all?
And so it's really, for years, and long before all of our time, probably, it was, whenever it was originally created, the rates were the same.
Yep.
Okay, so you have LaBelle, Felda, Pioneer for west, and you have Montura, and you have Clewiston for east, and the rates were all the same for everybody. But in reality, over time, over a long period of time, the costs are very different because they're two totally different animals. You've got a Montura station that has got a full roster, if you will, talking about how many people. I can't speak to Clewiston, but Montura is a little over 20. I think we have 20 or 24 folks that respond very frequently. Felda and Pioneer, not so much. It's not as many people that respond every time, or LaBelle will cover it. And so the idea of the rates being exactly the same probably isn't necessarily correct. And so if you have to Mark's suggestion, if when we do this EMS rate study, if we do maybe expand it, doesn't mean we put it all together, but we expand it and have them look at the fire rate study, I think that we would probably end up in a better place.
I like the idea more.
Yeah, I think that was a great suggestion. And so to answer Commissioner Harris's question, West Fire generates $584,000 a year. East Fire generates $613 a year. But again, it's not about so much, it's the revenue with the expenses, and we have it broken out here, which each department, and then per call. And we've got volume of calls here for each department, LaBelle, Clewiston, Pioneer, Montura. And so I'll resend this to everyone so you can all refresh yourselves and look at that. East Fire MSBU, the potential, the recommendation for this year for vacant residential, the increase would be $4.61. For a single-family dwelling, for example, would be $13.16. The maximum increase would be $131 for improved commercial over 50,000 square foot. I can tell you that there's eight properties that affects. And then the one above that for improved commercial and industrial, 10,000 to 50,000 square foot, the maximum would be $105, and there's 28 properties that would affect, just to kind of put it in.
Every discussion we're having right now, the growth that we talked about earlier is going to push these numbers up. That's just, every rooftop is going to bring in more of a drain on your fire, your EMS, your sheriff's department. Every bit of that's going to be there, and I believe that when we have these discussions, rather than shooting in the dark, we need to have them here to answer these questions. They had the information at one point on the calls, and we haven't addressed it. So if we could have them here when we're having this discussion, that's again, that can move things a lot quicker. And I'm in the same boat, Commissioner Swindle. I've argued with Mr. Harrison and them the same problem. I don't want to ask for an increase if it's not going to take care of the problem. Because now I got to come back again. They're going to say, you come back 2 years later, you ask for more money. And honestly, I have a problem with that as well. I don't want to put a Band-Aid on something in 2 years from now, go back and have to ask for more money. I just don't want to do that. If the numbers are laid out, like Commissioner Turner said, we can see each individual line item. We know what it is. Some of the calls were going to somebody, backed into somebody in the grocery store parking lot. We don't need a fire truck there for that. But we do need to get their input in from the fire chiefs. This is what's actually happening. This is the equipment that's out of date. This is what's going on. So I believe we need to have that input in the conversation. But we're discussing their livelihood, what's going to take to keep them men and women safe. So I agree with that, Commissioner Swindle. So I just have a hard time with a little bit here and a little bit there. I go home and tell the wife I want an extra $100 next week. I got to lay it out why. So it's kind of the same thing here. You want to talk, Mr. Martin? If you would come up to the mic, please, sir.
You got a meeting starting soon.
You're all right. Come on, we'll give you a whole 2 minutes.
Thank you. Just a little brief history. Two things I wanted to mention to the comments you have. Excellent discussion. We have the numbers. We've been working with them, tweaking them, getting those averages right. In February, that was the end of February when we had that last meeting, I spoke to you at the courthouse. And a little thing called COVID-19 rolled in, and that derailed it. And we've been back on it for the last 30 days, and we're hoping to wrap it up soon. And this incident has pointed out some of the deficiencies we have. But last year when I arrived, even before I came, I participated in a work session with our fire department in July and June of last year. The difficulty then, it was considered too late for you to make an MSBU adjustment decision. We're trying to get ahead of the game tonight by asking you to put a placeholder up to, as Jennifer pointed out. The fire department's request was, they suggested up to 25%. Jennifer and I looked at it. We feel like at least 15. So that's the range. We're in this similar range within 5%, I think, of where I would like to see it. The difficulty in going to what LaBelle has, $750,000, that one fire truck's going to wipe that out, replacement. But the good news is you don't have to borrow. You can pay as you go. So that's a good situation to be in. We are going to have capital needs. We're developing an updated 5-year plan, and we're going to present that. You'll have that. You'll have all the calls averaged, the rolling average. You'll have a refined benefit recommendation for countywide benefit enhancement. You'll have all of that before you're asked to take a final vote on this MSBU tax over the next 90 days. What you won't have tonight is the refinement, but you can't raise it if you don't put a placeholder there to go up to, whether it's 15% or 20% or whatever. So it's like a phased ask. We want you to give us that flexibility. Because last year we didn't, and the answer is no. This year, we're running close to a deficit with no capital funding. That is not sustainable. We have to have capital set aside to replace equipment and eventually apparatus. But if we don't do that this year, we're going to be another year behind. It'll be another year before we can deal with it. And I'll assure you, there's a whole lot cheaper to keep those volunteers by paying them a little bit of benefit boost this year than missing another window of opportunity to make it more challenging to keep volunteers. And then we have to start supplementing it with paid firefighters. And that's going to be a very expensive proposition, and you'll see the total budget probably double or triple during that time frame if you go to full-time paid firefighters and EMS. Took more than 2 minutes, but I'll be glad to answer any questions.
That's a good point. Thank you, Mr. Martin. We are getting close, so.
So the next slide was just what I already spoke about with the EMS and what we're working on with that, and that'll be brought back before you. It has to be adopted to create the EMS MSBU by December of 2020 for the following year. And then requesting your hopeful permission to do a July workshop so we can hopefully have more information of a lot of the uncertainties that we spoke about tonight at 3:30 before the next meeting. And that's it. That's all I had.
Has everybody been asked to cut 5%?
On the board departments, yes, sir. When we sent out, and we're still compiling all of those numbers, we asked all of our board departments to cut 5% of their operating budget in anticipation of, what's going on.
What about constitutional?
Constitutionals at the July workshop will present to you their budgets.
Can we set the date for the July workshop?
Before you do, can you repeat
have
Mr.
before the meeting.
Harrison's
At
question?
3:30 before the next meeting, if that's acceptable to everyone.
Yeah.
Jennifer,
Yes,
can
ma'am.
you repeat Mr. Harrison's question so she can know that she can't hear him?
But
Hey,
She's asking for a 5%
Yeah, unless you
decrease in departments. And then I think you said you didn't
Everyone's
talk to the
schedules.
constitutionals, right?
We sent the what we do, because I've learned the hard way over the years. So over the years, you say, cut your budget by 5 or 10%, and they say, no disrespect, I'm a constitutional officer, you can't
Do
tell
what I
me
want with my
how to do that. And so what we do is we send them what we've requested our board departments to do, and, they can choose to follow suit, or they can choose to come before you as board members and say, this is my budget, and I've either cut 5% or I've increased it by 5% or I've left it the same, and that is their right to do that. So that's how we handle that. We provide them what we're doing, and then they,
Well, if we cut, they need to cut.
and so that's for you all to tell them. I can't tell them that, and so that's how we handle it from a staff perspective.
We've already told them.
Okay,
What is the date of the next?
July 28th,
hey, and we're only doing one meeting in July?
yes.
I'm okay with making that the 14th rather than the 28th. That would be the second Tuesday, rather than the 4th. Would that be acceptable?
Well, why don't we have a workshop before the meeting?
Yeah, that's what they're going to do. We are, but all on the 28th. I'm just saying, if you'd rather do it the 14th, that'll give us, be a little earlier, give us more time to work after that.
Is that going to give them time to get what we're asking?
Yeah, they're ready now.
To do a workshop on July 14th.
And the meeting rather than the 28th.
Oh, I see.
So just move it to the 14th and not do a 28th
Well,
meeting.
wouldn't the
Workshop.
28th give you more time?
They don't need more time. They're ready now.
They ready now? Okay.
Depends on the
I can't.
advertisement.
You've always
Excuse
got
me.
reasons we can't.
Excuse me, Commissioners. We have petitions that are ready to go to public hearing, and we have the LPA meeting scheduled for July 15th, and in anticipation of the July 28th.
Can you check with us before you do those sometime?
Well, all we're discussing right now is a budget workshop's all we're discussing.
Well, I would like to do both. I would do both.
That's what he said,
But the
so-
budget work. Messing
You
up.
can't do the public hearing.
No, I'm servicing our constituents and our future businesses, sir.
It's a phone call. It's a phone call, Emily. Just all you got to do. You and Parker can't return a phone call. I've learned that this week.
We're going to adjourn for about 5 minutes, and we're going to come back. Thank you.
What? 14.